not going to do it. I am not going to do it. I'm not going to yell out some kind of kooky theory about what's happening in Darktide just to end up being wrong again. It's not gonna happen.
But do not let down your guard. Our contact's motives are unverified.
The Dark Mechanicum are in Darktide. God damn it, I did it again. Obey my cat! Hit the subscribe button. Yes, the Dark Mechanicum, or at least one heretic, probably have their titanium tendrils directly in the pot of Darktide instead of some faraway shadowy presence that you can just assume is working behind the scenes. And 40k lore heads, bear with me here for a second, because for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about because Darktide is your first introduction into 40k, let's get you on the same page. We all know Hadron by now, and KX8, and the other robot people in robes we see in this cutscene. All these characters are members of a cult of cybernetically enhanced humans that originated on Mars called the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Mechanicus are the builders, maintainers, and keepers of much, if not all, the ships, weapons, and general technology that continues the Imperium's war efforts. Without the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Imperium would be very far up a certain creek without a paddle, or a boat, or even a map to tell them how to get back to land. This is because while the Imperium of Man is very technologically advanced by our standards, most of the information on how all this technology works, who designed it, and how to keep it working has been lost to time. I know that sounds crazy, but keep in mind that most of the tech the Imperium still relies on was developed sometime between the 15th and 25th millenniums, making it anywhere from 16 to 26,000 years old. And on top of that, from the 25th to the 30th millenniums, the entire civilization of mankind spread throughout the galaxy suffered a major collapse. The AI robot army, called the Men of Iron that humans had made to help conquer and colonize the galaxy, turned on their masters, costing an incredible amount of human lives to end their revolt. In the same era, the chaos god Slanesh was born, allowing the warp to rip into real space, separating human colonies from each other. This created a situation where famine, disease, and a whole myriad of terrible stuff was able to thrive and decimate entire planets colonized by humans. Between suddenly not being able to navigate space without getting a creature with sharp teeth attached to your head, dying from starvation, or puking out your lungs, etc., record maintenance and writing down how stuff worked wasn't exactly at the forefront of humanity's mind at the time. Plus, they now had major trust issues from the whole Men of Iron uprising thing and destroyed a lot of technology out of fear and also necessity. To put it in perspective as to why any of this matters in the 41st millennium, let's pretend for a minute that you are a member of the Imperial Guard. Your standard issue lasgun has been jamming a lot, encountering errors, and also whispering things to you lately, and no matter how many times you bash it against a rock, it just isn't staying fixed. For a more permanent solution, you have two options of people to go to. Option number one is your commanding officer, who was a farmer less than a year ago, got conscripted by Tithe, and was considered management material because he had the brilliant idea to scoop algae out of the water with a slotted spoon instead of a large hole net during his farming days. He has no idea how a lasgun works any better than you do, and if he has any information available to him at all on how to fix it, the one part that hasn't been redacted says bash against a rock, and you can't be sure if you are or are not supposed to continue trying to beat the gun into submission. Option number two is your local tech priest, winner of the Alfred Molina lookalike competition and member of the Adeptus Mechanicus that has been actively learning, cataloging, and keeping information about all lost technology for the last 16,000-ish years and played some part in building your damn gun in the first place. They might even be able to make it work better than it ever has. This is exactly why the Imperium needs the Mechanicus so badly, because the Adeptus Mechanicus formed on Mars sometime in the 25th millennium and dedicated themselves to recovering lost human technology throughout the galaxy with the intent to understand and recreate it, or lock it away forever in a vault if it's deemed to be too dangerous to mess with. like AI. The people of Mars began this work as a religious endeavor to better understand and get closer to the machine god, or Omnissiah as they call it. In the 30th millennium, before he was a dried out husk in a chair like that old ladyfish from SpongeBob, the Emperor of Mankind showed up to Mars to seek their alliance in his new crusade to reunite humanity across the galaxy. Instead of his usual offer of submit to my will, pay me a tithe in human bodies and resources to fuel my crusade, and smile while doing it or I'll re-educate you into submission, he instead took a much more diplomatic approach when it came to the Mechanicum of Mars, knowing full well that their technological might could crush his hopes and dreams instantly. Many of the cult Mechanicus, at the time known as the Mechanicum, were astounded by how scientifically minded he was and the depth of knowledge he understood. It wasn't long before many in the leadership of the Mechanicum declared the Emperor as a physical manifestation of the Omnissiah, a flesh and blood avatar made to set foot on the Red Planet and help guide the Mechanicum closer to the machine god. You know, Techno-Jesus. The Mechanicum ultimately agreed to ally themselves to the Emperor, provided they could continue their work and worship the Omnissiah, and not be beholden strictly to Imperial doctrines. The treaty was made, and the Mechanicum became basically an autonomous, self-governing power within the Imperium, the only people with such a luxury, and all was right and peaceful between the two empires. Until it wasn't. A small group of dissenters amongst the Mechanicum believed the Emperor to be a false prophet, just a man that had nothing to do with the Omnissiah, and a tyrant who was not offering an opportunity of mutual growth, but instead an ultimatum to Mars to bend the knee to him or be destroyed, and the Emperor would take what he wants by force. This belief, along with the arrival of one of Horus's representatives to try and convince the leader of the Mechanicum to turn his back on the Emperor and instead work with Horus and achieve true freedom, led to a split among the tech priests. The leader of the Mechanicum, the Fabricator General, was convinced to betray the Emperor of Mankind and instead work for Horus during the heresy, and those that followed him became known as the Dark Mechanicum. These heretics, get it? Heretics, joined the Dark Mechanicum either because they believed the Emperor to be a false god, because they didn't agree with the Mechanicum's doctrines that forbid pursuits and reclamation of certain knowledge, like AI, or some mix of the two. Many of the Dark Mechanicum retreated into the Eye of Terror, aka the Warp, or palled around with traitor legions to protect themselves from retribution by the Imperium, or fled so far outside the Imperium site within the galaxy that they could go undetected. Which brings us to Darktide's Atoma Prime, a planet in the Mobian domain, a section of space bordering the Fringe which is relatively untouched and unexplored by humankind. How is the Dark Mechanicum present and affecting the war for Tertium? Well, first of all, let me just say I am not trying to theorize that we are going to see actual Dark Mechanicum enemies physically present in Darktide. All followers of the Mechanicum, or Adeptus Mechanicus for that matter, tend to be reclusive and keep all of their operations and conflicts as internal to their own group as possible. Since the Dark Mechanicum are in such a dangerous position of being discovered by either their brothers and sisters of the Adeptus Mechanicus or by the Imperium itself, they tend to remain as isolated individuals or sometimes very small generational family groups that keep and pass information over the millennia. Hey guys, the version of Joe that's been editing this video here. So I just wanted to say really quickly, I do know that the Dark Mechanicum will have Forge Worlds, Hell Forge Worlds specifically, like the Adeptus Mechanicus. I didn't think that that was particularly relevant until it was brought to my attention by Cabus in the Discord community, shout out Cabus my man, that there is a Psychona collar with some flavor text about Forge World Obscurus, which once supplied much of the Mobian domain, though those days are long since past. And that got my gears spinning on something Hadron said in the Secrets of the Machine God trailer, which has actually been bugging me for a little while. She specifically says that we have the opportunity to create the Mobian steel of old, and the way that she words that specifically seems like it might be referencing a time before the Siege of Tertium, which makes me wonder, could this be connected to the Forge World Obscurus? Which could also mean maybe there are more Dark Mechanicum than we think at play, and maybe we will see like a boss or something. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. video. The Dark Mechanicum would simply not operate on the scale to fit the Tide-type enemy profile that Darktide requires. Instead, we're looking at probably one or maybe a very small group of individuals working alongside Admonition and Wolfer's Traitor Company. The location of the Mobian domain on the border of the fringe outside of Imperial charted area and control would be an ideal location for a member of the Dark Mechanicum to hide. So there's an automatic point in the favor that they may be present. Now, the smoking gun that originally sent me down this rabbit hole is actually a weird detail that's easy to overlook about the demonic growths that we encounter and clear in several missions. When you beat back the tentacles and get the larger eye of the growth to appear, you'll notice that it's actually somewhat mechanical in nature, which is a really interesting detail. Since we know that this is a demonic growth, being mechanical in nature would actually put it somewhere in the ballpark of a demon engine or other demonic construct. And before you start trying to tell me that this is a demonic entity that has taken over and grown into unrelated machinery over time, I'm gonna make the assertion right now that whatever this fitting is around the eyeball that has small arms that anchor it into a surface is way too perfect to be happenstance, especially since we encounter the same growth with the same mechanical parts multiple places all over Tertium, and it's the same every time. It's never covered in random pipes, junk metal, or anything else to indicate that this is not an intentionally constructed demonic machine. Which means that someone who is down with chaos and had the technical know-how had to have built this. Could it have been a warpsmith? Possibly, but I'd argue that it's not as likely as a dark mech when you consider the nature of this demonic growth. As far as I can find, it's pretty unique in the scope of 40k demonic constructs. It's decidedly not actually a demon engine, which a warpsmith would probably be most likely to be part of a very direct machine of war. But it's still an intentional mechanical construction in some percentage of its being, and without being able to see more of this demonic growth, we may never know exactly how much of it is mechanical. The only existing model in 40k I can find that I feel is the closest in function to this mechanical demonic growth we see in Darktide is the Miasmic Malignifier, which is an organic-ish potbelly stove Nurgle machine that spreads corruption. The unique nature of this growth, in my opinion, points to something that was built and born more from experimentation and ingenuity, which is exactly what the Dark Mechanicum does. They may be allied to chaos and shun their Adeptus brethren, but they still live their lives in pursuit and reverence of technology, striving to create new mechanical life that will bring them closer to true understanding of the Omnissiah. Another reason why I think a Mech-ED could be present is because the Vox communication and cogitator interrogation issues that have plagued the Morningstar's operations might totally be a scrap code attack. A scrap code attack is more or less the 40k version of a computer virus. These are pieces of code that are basically written in digital dark tongue, chaos-infused bits of information that attack and infect technology. A scrap code attack can result in shutting down entire cogitators, hampering the effectiveness of tasks, and disrupting Vox communications. Obviously, warp interference and just generally having equipment in poor repair can also cause these problems, but there's something specific that KX8 says in the second Carnival mission that made me perk my ears up once I started looking into the Dark Mechanicum angle.
Warning gave I, you heeded not. Madness infected our Vox receptors.
This is really specific. KX telling us to forego communication to avoid affecting transmitters elsewhere actually describes exactly how a scrap code attack works. When an infected transmitter sends information to its next point of data reception, if that cogitator that is on the receiving end doesn't recognize the scrap code for what it is, the scrap code begins replicating itself rapidly and effectively shuts down the receiving unit until its systems are purged. Now, it is possible for demons to directly infect computers and systems in the 40k universe, but this often takes a significant amount of time, and it's far less likely for demons to instantly jump to new units and then be purged as quickly as we see happen when our communicators go down in the Carnival mission. Is it impossible that it's simply warp interference jumping from point to point when lines of communication are open? No, but generally speaking, warp-based corruption of systems takes time and exposure, sometimes decades decades or longer, and the problems that plague our heroes' operations come and go very quickly, like a sudden attack that gets purged and resolved in short order. The Dark Mechanicum are the ones who unleashed the scrap code into the galaxy in the first place, and it's a pretty common MO for any Chaos Invasion force to try and knock out communications in the city or planet they're besieging with a scrap code attack. So if there is a member of the Dark Mechanicum active somewhere in the story of Darktide, how might this affect the game in the future? That's a really good question. One answer is maybe not at all. Maybe the weird mechanical nature of the demonic growth will never be addressed, and we'll never know for sure exactly what is causing the Vox and Cogitator issues throughout Tertium, and it'll just remain a mystery that simply existed to explain certain game mechanics and add some flavor. But considering that this expansion is Secrets of the Machine God, we may be looking at the Adeptus Mechanicus playing a little bit larger of a role in Darktide overall, and a Dark Mechanicum agent would fit perfectly in the setting of being involved with a chaos cult that's sieging a hive city, creating unusual demonic constructs, and being involved in tech attacks. And it would be a good foil against the fan favorite Darktide characters Hadron and Kayex. In fact, the presence of a Dark Mechanicum actor would likely shake the tech priests of the Morning Star and become a high priority for them to internally track down and eliminate. And since the Adeptus Mechanicus are quite reclusive and like to deal with matters within their own kind, it could be a reason to have a heavier and more boots on the ground active presence from their cult. You know, like maybe a player character. Given that we also now have Hestia Prine on board from the Ecclesiarchy to tally our deeds and help determine if we paid penance for our original crimes with enough blood, sweat, and tears, it's arguably more likely now than it ever has been before that we'd be able to get access to a playable class that doesn't start as a reject. Maybe. Wait a second. Rewind that. Is that? It is! That's a miasmic malignifier! Now, I thought that those were only available to... Hang on, guys, I gotta check something. Ha! Interesting. A huge thank you as always to my supporters for helping make this video possible, Leah S over on Patreon, and YouTube channel members Rue on Top and Rosa.